Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. It's End Times Friday. We're going to talk about the issues of the day, which will be fun. Wasn't that fun yesterday with Bob and Gary Rockwell?
Oh, that's got to be one of my favorites. I know I say that often, but that one truly was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
That was so much fun to hear their story.
Yeah, they
wow.
They are. It's always, again, it's always beautiful to experience the joy that a couple has, and again, because of the perspective that I get to see what it was and what it is.
Right.
And what it is this, as we're trying to describe it to everybody, it's the super abundant life. It's the covenant. I'm going to bless you to make you a blessing, and it just exudes from, as we have these guests, like Bob and Gary. That's their life. I mean, their life is joyful, and it doesn't mean that they're not, again, exempt from issues and problems and things they have to deal with, which they do. But they sure have one fun time.
They really do. And I tell you, I think one of my favorite parts, besides just hearing some of the fun stories too, and just how God orchestrated it all, was watching how patient, honestly, and personal he was, especially in walking Carrie through.
Yeah.
Just addressing her every question along the way and knowing exactly what steps and where he needed to place her to grow her faith and to just invite her into this kingdom impact world. And it's so fun to watch, because I think a lot of times we falsely think, well, that only happens for this type of person, or they must have immediately accepted all of it as truth and run with it. And to hear the process, it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. And as we try to express that, is particularly our topic of each Friday is kind of an overview of what's happening and what does the scriptures have to say about the end times. Just again, so we look at the truth of it. How are we to react to it? As we've stated in Revelation, he says it's really important to pay attention and to be obedient to what I'm showing you, so that it is still the Word of God and included in the Word of God to be considered. So it's not something that a lot of people say, well, too complicated. I don't even want to think about it. Whatever happens, happens. And I said, as I talked to people about that, I said, well, is that how you're approaching your life with God? And that really is the essence of it. Yeah, whatever happens, happens. I said, well, as illustrated by even this, that God has a will and information and discernment for you to understand, and he spoke this for every generation to spend time in it, understand it, have a clarity about it, and then what does that mean, to us at the moment? And what we're trying to do in our series is, let's just lay out what the truth says and take it as it comes, and receive it as it comes without overdoing it, over-interpreting it, and say, well, this means this. What does it say, what it doesn't say, and just receive what it has to say. So, we're having quite a fun time with it. And as we look at the world, today, that the issues of what's happening, which we'll talk about, today, we could see how maybe there's something going on, and that's what we're going to look at today is the signs of the times,
Right.
which Jesus tells us to pay attention to. And so we've spent up to this point, we've described Daniel's understanding. He describes what's called 70 weeks, which is all has been fulfilled except all 69 weeks have been fulfilled except one. And that would be considered by everybody, even Jesus's disciples, is when is that 1 week going to happen?
Right.
And that 1 week is 7 years, which then ushers in the end. And again, as we talk about the end, and I hear a lot of people even today saying, "Well, I'm just waiting for Jesus to come back, and I hope he comes back today." Interesting enough, I can say, well, it ain't going to be today. And why? Well, because he comes at the end of the 7 years. So the 7 years has to start, and once that starts, okay, we know when that's going to happen. And by the way, we talked about with Daniel, we know for sure when the middle of the tribulation is, the tribulation being a 7-year period, that is called the abomination of desolation, that the Antichrist says, "I am God and everybody needs to worship me." And that'll be, universal around the world, that's what to happen. If that happens, when that happens, that's middle of the tribulation, called the 3.5 year mark. Yeah, we know Christ is coming back 3.5 years later. That's a for sure. Now we don't know the exact day of that, but we basically will know the timing of it. So we're talking about the last week. We went through with Daniel his beast. He said he had visions of 4 beasts. The 3 beasts described the time from him really up until now. The kind of the way the society goes, the way that the nations have gone, the world has gone, and we talked about the Israel and how they were part of it in terms of what happened to them. And then the big one, which we'll get to actually, is it's now been returned as a nation. That is a big marker.
Right.
And
because there are several prophecies that have to be fulfilled before we set into that last week, that 7 years.
That's
correct?
right. That's right. And one of them is that Israel returns as a nation, which they have done now. And and that's one of the interesting, let's say, indicators that is this really the time? Because 2,000 years lapsed, and then Israel became a nation. Well, that's pretty significant. And we talked about Islam, developing, the Middle East issues that are going on between Israel and the Islam nations, and the Sunnis and the Shiites, and the different categories of what's happening. And again, the Sunnis, which would be Saudi Arabia, Jordan, UAE, some parts of Iraq, they are pro, let's say, West, pro Europe, pro U.S., pro Israel, in a sense of we would like to align with you and do commerce together. Let's have peace and do commerce together, and let's try to thrive together. The Shiites would be the more extreme version of it, and they're the ones that are having a pure interpretation of the Quran, which is to bring Islam worldwide, and have everybody worship Islam. And if you don't, they call you infidel, and they're literally, trying to kill everybody else, per se, particularly Israel, because they want to wipe them off the face of the earth. So that's why the dynamics in the Middle East are really interesting. So as we look at that, Jesus was asked by his disciples, when is the end going to come? Now, that implies, by the way, it's kind of interesting, that Jesus talked about this.
Right.
And he described things to them, and he was giving them information about it and probably talking about it a decent amount of time. And they specifically said, okay, we've understood a lot you've said. Could you tell us exactly when this is going to happen? Because it's on their mind, and always thinking, is this going to happen in our lifetime? Well, Jesus makes a statement about this. So go to Matthew 24, and let's read verses 1 through 14. Go ahead, and Kathy, go ahead and read that. It's a little bit long, but that's okay.
Okay.
Matthew 24, 1 to 14.
Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all of these, do you not? Truly, I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come.
Yeah. So he says, and again, the disciples are saying, what are the signs of the end? And to them, it meant, what are we going to be able to observe that will say to us, it's coming.
We're getting close.
We're getting close. And even Jesus, he said, as you see this, you'll be understanding birth pangs. Okay, well, you've had children.
Yes, I have.
What are birth pangs?
So birth pains, when you think about that illustration, it's such a perfect illustration because they, something is coming. There will be an end product at it, but in the moment there are contractions and physical pain actually that is going on, preparing your body for what's coming. And so there's lots of symbolism in all of that. But one of the interesting things about it is that the closer you get to the birth, the shorter the span between the birth pains actually is. And so they come more frequently and more intensely as they prepare for the birth.
Okay. So Jesus uses that analogy, which is always interesting to me, because he was a man, and per se never experienced that, but because he's Jesus and God, they understand it and have truth and understand the truth. They could use that analogy, and that is that you start to get signals. And again, I remember when my wife, it's like, I'm having a contraction. Well, even then, it wasn't like, let's go to the hospital.
Right. Well, in fact, there's Braxton Hicks, which are kind of the false contractions,
the false contractions, yeah. It's okay. We know it's getting closer, but we got to see now, and you said it really well, it picks up tempo more quickly. It happens that you start to see things happen much more quickly, and then they get more intense.
Yes.
So then that becomes that moment, when the water breaks, and okay, yep, they're 4 or 5 minutes apart. The water broke. We got to go. Why? Well, the baby's coming. And so he's saying that birth pangs are kind of be that way as we look at the end. You're going to see some signs. Things are moving. As they get more intense, as they get more frequent, you'll start to realize, it's here. And he even said, you'll think it's here, but it's not yet. All these things need to have occurred, and then the end, he said, then the end will come.
Right.
Okay. So let's explore what are all these things and where are we? He said, make sure that no one deceives you, and says, this is the way to God. This is the way to have eternal life with Him, life in His kingdom with Him. We all are going to have eternal life. It's just a matter of where.
Right.
But everybody says, well, here's the way. So by definition, he says, be careful that no one deceives you, because what they're saying is false, not true. Not what I've demonstrated, shown, revealed as truth. Only follow me, but you'll see lots of opportunity to be deceived. Okay, so I'm just going to read a few of these that are in the world right now. Islam, Mormonism, Christian Science, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventist, Scientology, Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism, Dalai Lama, Ancestor Worship, which is I got a really funny story about that. I spoke over in Vietnam with another believing executive, and we were invited by a professor who was underground, Christian professor. He's teaching at the University of Hanoi to be there as a witness.
Oh, wow.
So he invited us to come over and to share our faith. He said, come on over, share your faith, and it'll be great. Okay, so, okay, sure. Yeah, we got, approval from God to go. We go, we're excited. The first day we get there, he says, now before we do anything else, you got to come with me. He takes us in a closet and closes the door, and it's dark in there. He says, now just listen. He said, just listen. He says, you have been followed and you've been bugged ever since you got off the plane.
Wow.
And they're going to watch you. And there's going to be 80 CEOs in our class for a week that you're going to speak to. He said also in that class is going to be KGB agents. And if you ever mention the name Jesus Christ, they're going to arrest you on the spot and take you to jail, and we'll probably never see you again.
Wow.
So
welcome to Hanoi.
Yeah. So I said, I got a question. You invited us over here to share our faith. So what the heck are we doing? It seems to me we're doing nothing, and I just want to go home because I'm here to share my faith. He said, look,
right.
He said, don't worry about it. He said, this is how it works. If they ask you a question about Christ, you can answer it. You just can't present it. So you got to wait for them to ask you a question, and somehow God will provide this opportunity. And and we're thinking, oh brother, this ought to be interesting. So we go in, and the day one is and it's all business stuff. It's all business. So we're talking capitalism and business, and so we get ready to do day two, and we're meeting. We go back to this closet each morning to pray. And he said, by the way, that we're in this closet because there are no bugs in this closet. So they can't hear us. So we go in the closet and we're praying, and we get a knock on the door. And he opens it up, and it's his secretary, his associate. And she says, and she knew who he was. He says, I know you're a Christian. I know you're believing in Jesus Christ. He says, my mother last week contracted leprosy, and she is being sent to a leper colony. And our family has been praying to our ancestors, because in Vietnam they worship their ancestors. We've been praying that our ancestors would heal her, and she ain't getting healed. Would you pray to your God, Jesus, that he would heal her? And he says, yeah, sure. So, and by the way, I'm just learning about this healing stuff. So my attitude was, yeah, sure, we'll pray, but it ain't going to happen. So we get, and we say, okay, Father, what do you got to say about this? And, would you heal this lady? And so we do our second day. We do the same thing. Third day, we pray, and then we go out to the third day, and I'm the speaker, and I'm just starting, and this lady, runs in the room, and she says, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh! I got to tell everybody, my mom got healed of leprosy because these guys prayed to their God, Jesus Christ, and he healed her, and she's healed and home." And we're dumbfounded. First of all, we're dumbfounded. Like, well, that was cool. Well, that opened up the whole rest of the week. These guys saying, what do you mean you prayed to Jesus? Who's Jesus?
And as long as they ask, you could answer.
I could answer that as long as I didn't say you should or you'd better or just here's what's true for me, because they asked me. Right. So I didn't get arrested.
Wow.
And we gave witness and testimony all week, because they kept asking me, how did that work? How does that work? How does what does that mean? What's Jesus Christ? And so we did. And then at the end, they have a ceremony, and the ceremony is, they said to us, we're going to sing a song to you, and they said bless you, and now we would like you to sing a song to us and bless us. So we started praying, okay, what do we do? What do we do? And God said, sing him Amazing Grace. So we did. We sang Amazing Grace, which, by the way, doesn't have the word Jesus Christ in it. It just talks about, what I was, and now I'm transformed. And we sang it, and one of the words in there for righteousness, they didn't have a word for that. So they would come up after we sang. They came up and said, could you explain that word? What does that word mean? Because we don't understand what that means. And so we got to share the entire gospel from a group that had ancestor.
That is so good.
Yeah. It was remarkable of how he can fulfill it. But again, as I learned that, of a whole nations have ancestor worship, where they believe that their ancestors have passed on, and now they're helping them, even though, kind of like this lady, it's not really working too well.
Right.
So that's
well,
one.
And honestly, don't we even see that particular thing? I've seen, I don't know, shadows of it, I guess is the best way to say it, infiltrating our culture even.
Yeah.
I mean, the number of people that I know that were like, oh, I saw a cardinal today. That's my mom looking over me.
Right.
That's, I mean, so there are, whether they truly believe these things or not, we see parts of that idea coming in and blurring lines in our culture as well. I believe.
Reincarnation. As well as, they're now serving us back here. There's things we know, astrology, horoscopes, fortune telling, New Age stuff, yoga, mysticism, the social gospel, Chrislam, where Christianity and Islam are together, universalism, and that's where everything is gets you to heaven. Just be a good person.
Right.
Denominations have different rules, etc. And there's hundreds more of deception. So the enemy Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes through me. Then the gate is narrow. It's just one place. It's not all of them. It's just one. Well, deception is all these things become ways, which is the enemy trying to get the world. And remember, and he's saying as this intensifies, so this has been going on for a long time, but as it intensifies, the birth pangs are going to get more intense. And so what I see is that the deception is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, so that if you talk to even, let's say, millennials, they have a hard time believing that Christianity could be the only way, and they start exploring all these other things. So the percentage of people that were easily following or desiring to follow at least Christian principle are now kind of abandoning that, and the deception is, tending to be universalism and all these different ways are okay. The Bible isn't true anyway. That's one big one that I see. The Bible isn't really true, so you can't rely on what it says about even things like marriage. It's between a man and a woman. Well, you can't really believe that as being so. So let's reject it. So the deception in that area is really developing.
Extremely high. Yes, I agree.
The next one he talks about is wars and rumors of wars. And he says nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, so that we look at, what's really going on. And remember, war is behind it all is principalities and powers.
Right.
And Satan
So when he says,
Go ahead.
it says, I just thought about that, y'all, as it says nations against nations and kingdoms against kingdoms. I think I have traditionally read that as, like really kingdoms,
No.
thinking a physical earthly king and whatever. That's not actually what he's talking about there, though, right? He's
No.
highlighting nations against nations, that's the physical, and kingdom against kingdom, that's the spiritual.
Spiritual.
And that's going on simultaneously, and we
Right.
got to pay attention to both.
That's right. That's right. And particularly the deception behind it, so that somebody could think, well, I might be, living in Germany, but I believe in this other thing, which is really the spiritual kingdom. And so there's this combination of both happening at the same time.
Right.
And, some of the things that are true is that, the 20th century and going into the 21st century now has been the bloodiest time in history. And again, if we went back to all the way from Adam and Eve till now, there's been wars, killing, awful stuff. But in the 20th century, with World War I and World War II and the Korean War and the Vietnam War, the number of deaths, it was literally the bloodiest time in history. And now we're moving into the 21st century, and it's accelerating. So that, what are we seeing? Well, Russia has advanced nuclear weaponry.
Right.
And they're testing new things that, technically speaking, are superior to other things. China has it's interesting. I saw a picture of this. I don't know if you remember did you ever see the movie any of the Star Wars movies? Have you watched much?
But it was really when I was a kid. I have not followed back with the.
So you haven't seen the newest ones.
It around.
The newest ones have interesting perspective on it. Is they have drones that are like mosquitoes in the sky. I mean, they're just everywhere. And so that was a Star Wars thing. Well, I just saw a video of China testing a drone army. And
Really?
it was literally 1,000 drones up in the sky,
Hmm.
and you could see that they were being controlled and operating in unison. So
Mm-hmm.
they would go right or turn left or go up or go down. And they all had the ability to have weapons in them.
Mm-hmm.
So the technology is really going on. And then, as we know, in the Middle East, that Iran and the Shiites are threatening to eliminate Israel,
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to develop nuclear capability, to do that. So when he says wars and rumors of wars,
Mm-hmm.
it's that is that intensity increasing, and we're seeing skirmishes all over the globe,
Right.
with attacks and fights and terrorism now happening, as well as rumor of war. In other words, threat of war.
Mm-hmm.
That the threats are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So that intensity is happening. He said, when that happens, watch. Um, Another one, he said, you'll have a lot of earthquakes. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so you can take a graph, and this is really interesting, all the way back from the 1970s, that kind of increased a little bit through the 1990s. And from 1991 through now, it's increased 300%
Wow.
in the number of earthquakes. And by the way, interesting enough, and you talked about
Mm-hmm.
the intensity of the earthquakes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So we just had recently an 8.2, which is, they're on the Richter scale. So a 6 is a very, very damaging. 7 is catastrophic. 8 is be over the top because they're 100 times stronger.
Wow.
Each number is 100 times stronger than the other
Okay.
one.
Where was the 8.2?
It was
Remember?
yeah, it was outside of Alaska, um,
Okay. Mm.
and they were concerned. They were concerned about a tsunami. It didn't happen, but they were
Right.
concerned about it. And I can remember Linda and I were we just gotten married, and from the Midwest, and I went to grad school in USC
Mm-hmm.
out in California, and so we all we did was whatever we could get, and I had a Camaro. Whatever we could get in the car, that was what we took,
Mm-hmm.
and we drove to California. We drove to the school, and so we get there, find an apartment. It's out by the ocean, and third day we're there. This 6.4 earthquake hits,
Wow.
and it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Everything starts shaking. And my first comment was, "Hey, Linda, stop shaking the bed." And she says, "I'm not shaking the bed. You're shaking it." I said, "Not." And we see everything fell off the walls, etc.
Right.
And we heard this tremendous slap of water against the wall we were next to. And we happened to be, our apartment was next to the pool.
Okay.
So we thought, because we had heard, being from the Midwest, that California's going to fall in the ocean. And we thought, uh-oh, because we recognize this is an earthquake, and and we're gonna fall in the ocean. This is it. And of course we didn't. And there were lots of aftershocks after that, but it was a scary moment of something way beyond your control that shakes everything and could destroy everything. And there was destruction from that nearby. So when he talks about earthquakes, it's the grumbling, the groaning of the earth, which, by the way, he talks about in Romans chapter 8, that it's going to increase, and it's increased 300% just in the last 10 to 20 years. Well, that's intensity. That's frequency, is occurring.
Right.
And there's a thing in called the Pacific Ring of Fire, that where earthquakes are going to occur around the Pacific Rim, all the way around it, on both sides of it, and also volcanoes. And there's volcanoes now that have erupted that have been dormant for as many as 400 or 500 years.
Wow.
That have now erupted. and the threat of eruption is strong, and some are active right now. So that the earthquakes and the volcanoes are occurring, and the intensity is picked up. And again, it's true. It's a fact. It's reportable. So again, is the birth
Something
pangs
to pay attention to.
pay attention. The next one is famine. And again, interesting enough, and this is almost worldwide, but there's famine literally all over the world.
Right.
And the reason is because of the crops, either through extreme rain or extreme drought.
Right.
And it's impacted, the food belts, including Midwest and America, that food has been ruined. And the orange crop down in Florida this last year, a big percentage of it is basically ruined. So as you can imagine, you got shortages, and then also you've got price issues because of the shortage. You have price issues. So famine is a big one. And on top of that, by the way, and this is something that we could only look at and think of being a movie, but plagues of locust.
Right.
And we've actually, interesting enough, we've experienced here in America a unusual plague of locusts that have eaten crops, but it's particularly bad in Africa.
Right.
And it would
The
be
photos are horrendous.
Yeah, and you would consider it biblical in nature. That when you look at the pictures of it, you could imagine. I guess that's what it was like with Moses, with the plague of locusts, and they're just swarming, and they eat everything, and they're marching forward, and they're still going
and just
on,
moving straight through crops. Yeah.
He talks about pestilence, and pestilence, would be, you would look at disease. So this would be the equivalent of disease. So what's going on right now, for example, is that disease, as we know, and we'll get to COVID here in a minute, but things like AIDS, which by the way, because of the way it's been handled socially, we don't even hear about it anymore.
That's true.
Well, and our interpretation of that is, since we don't hear about it, I guess it's resolved. Right now in the world, 42.5 million people in the world have AIDS.
Really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and the death rate is high. If you happen to live in America and you get AIDS, there's medicine for that, and so the death rate is much, much lower in an advanced country. But in poorer countries, it's not. So it's a disease that it kills you. It's a pestilence. So AIDS is a big one, and of course, heart disease, lung disease, diabetes. These are all things that are increasing in frequency. Well, now we have one that is right in front of us, called COVID. And we're not sure what happened, but coronavirus has been with us for decades, 50, 60, 70 years, if not longer. And coronavirus is really the promoter of flu and colds and lung disease and issues like that. Well, this particular strain, COVID, what they call COVID-19, and now they're into, we got that one kind of under control, but now there's a variant called Delta and another one called Columbia, where it's a world. I mean, think about it. It's worldwide, and it has impacted the response of the world on a worldwide basis.
And very quickly.
And very quickly.
Very quickly, yes.
And so the pestilence, the increase in the pestilence, we happen to be seeing that firsthand. That it's hard to understand, like, okay, yeah, we have all these diseases, even AIDS is like, yeah, okay. But now we're all faced with this new one that is it's a pestilence, and it's worldwide, and they really don't know how are we going to resolve this, and where is it, and how does it work, and do we need to quarantine again and mask up and vaccine, and people with vaccines are getting it again, and so and it, by the way, contributes to the chaos that we've been talking about. We're not sure what's going to happen, but now it's literally affected every single country in the world, and they don't know yet how to deal with this. So, is this pestilence, because of the intensity of this, and now the frequency of the variants, is that ushering in something? Because he said that's what's going to happen, at the end. He talked about trouble. You're gonna have troubles. Now, as we look at trouble, he's described it already as shortages. That things that you were used to having normally aren't available to you. So things like food or places that operate normally are no longer available. And of course, we can interpret that as supply chain issues.
Right.
So if, for example, because of when COVID is promoted as you're going to have to go home and quarantine, for example. Well, guess what happens? Everybody goes to the store and buys stuff up. And that creates a shortage because the supply chain can't supply it anymore in time. So if you said, well, and I don't know if you remember this already, but simple things like toilet paper.
Right. I remember at the beginning of
At
COVID,
the beginning of it wasn't available, and then when it did become available, literally the store would say you can only take one carton of it. You can't stock up.
Right. Paper towels did the same thing around here, and ground beef. And,
and
several things.
And by the way, today, one of the troubles, and I've experienced this personally, is if you need a part for something mechanically because it broke down, well, the response, like parts for, let's say, freezers or refrigerators, I need a part. Well, it's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 weeks for us to get that part.
Right.
Because and so what that means is, well, for me, that causes me trouble because my refrigerator doesn't work and I can't get it fixed like normally.
Right.
I can get it fixed. Well, there's trouble. The other trouble that we all are going to experience or have is economic. And that is that, am I going to keep getting paid what I get paid, and am I going to experience trouble? They're just, for example, the disruption of things impacts people at different levels. So one of the issues of COVID was if you were renting but you couldn't pay your bill, then it was okay not to pay the bill, and you couldn't be evicted. By the way, that was up a week or so ago, but now they're coming back with reinstating that, which is, and we can certainly appreciate that. But if you're a landlord, you experience trouble,
right?
Because, well, I got to pay my bank the mortgage because they're not releasing me from that.
Right.
So I got to pay it, but I'm not getting the income that I was getting from a normal renter. And so, yeah, it's a big problem. And again, let me just characterize it as trouble all the way around because of the disruption economically. The banking system worldwide is creating in part of the trouble because of the central banking of all the governments borrowing the money, which they've supplied, creates a burden on that government. What's called excess debt, which is why even in a decent economy, they haven't raised interest rates. Because if they did, that would cause the disproportionate amount of the what's called the gross domestic product of any country to be paid to interest,
right,
and not to the programs of the government. Well, that's trouble. There's a trouble brewing, and we're experiencing it directly in what's called inflation. And that is the things that I used to pay X dollars for are now more expensive. Maybe I'm not making as much, so now I have less discretionary income. So I can't enjoy things. That's causing me trouble because I got to pay for things that are now more expensive because of inflation. Normally, the Federal Reserve, the central banks and the government would work together to get that under control.
Right.
Well, right now, because of the trouble, they really can't control it like they used to. So it could get bad, and we have an example of that. It's in the nation of Venezuela, where their inflation was so much that it was going up 1,000% a day. To where, if you earned, let's say you earned $1,000, equivalent of $1,000 even that day. Well, tomorrow you could only buy what would have been the day before worth $1.
Right. And in fact, they even were having to pay people multiple times a day, correct?
Yeah, to keep up. Yeah. And so as a result of that, there's shortages. And so you've taken a country like Venezuela that, interesting enough, used to be one of the premier luxurious places on earth. Very stable, doing very, very well, and everybody enjoyed living there. And because of the inflation and the way they were running things, they basically everything became worth less. And now the supply chain is in essence gone. So they're struggling to just exist on try to get the food and shelter, but they're not thriving because they're experiencing trouble. Well, we're starting to see worldwide inflation that maybe not be controllable. So is that going to create trouble economically? The answer is it could very much. And again, we look at it as birth pang, and that is that it's not here yet, but maybe there's a pang about it. There's and is it going to accelerate? It's interesting. It's like, that's interesting. And then as we'll go further with this, but the economic impact of COVID could be problematic. Could be trouble. So if which we've already experienced once, unemployment went sky high. The government had to fund people. Businesses got disruptive. If it happens again, which there's some discussion about that, worldwide again, maybe we got to lock things back down. And governments are going to have to stimulate everything and pay people again. Well, that would be considered recessionary and cause a big drop in the economics of the world, which ultimately impacts me, and that's trouble.
Right.
So when he says trouble, the birth pangs of trouble, well, in my opinion, we've never seen so much variation and so much potential for things just not working out too well. And this could be trouble. So,
right. And on a global scale. We have seen, I believe, you can look at pockets of history and see in certain areas some of these things going, and being frequent and intense. But to see it on the global scale, increasing in frequency and intensity on all of the fronts described in Matthew 24 is certainly worthy of paying attention to.
Right. So as we end this time, it's just what it's saying is, and you really set it up well, is the birth pangs as they move toward fulfillment. The baby is ultimately born.
Right.
Well, how do you know? Well, the birth pangs, and they start, and then they get more frequent, and then they get more intense, and then it's time. So here's the question. We described some of them. They're what Jesus spoke to them exactly.
Right.
And it's always interesting to me where he says, you're going to see more earthquakes. I mean, that's interesting that he would put that in the
that specific
in the list. Earthquakes and famine and pestilence and wars and rumors of wars and trouble. Well, he listed them, which he said, therefore watch for the signs. And so the question that we all have to look at is, are we experiencing those birth pangs? And again, because he said we don't know the time and date, which we'll see next time, that we can't for certain say, oh yeah, sure, this is it, because we could go back 100 years and people would say, well, I saw some of these then,
right,
and it wasn't the birth, it wasn't it, and so we can't say, oh yeah, I know for sure it's going to happen in the next 3 years, but rather, well, these birth pangs are interesting, and they are happening, and the frequency and the intensity is picking up. So the question, and again, we all have to ask each other, is something going on that we need to pay attention to as it translates into, are we as believers, because he said, by the way, in there, and we'll talk about this, that we're going to be persecuted, even to the point of death. So if that's true, then how are we supposed to guide our life through that while we live out? Remember, he said, I'm going to give you the super abundant life. So how do those two things come together, and what is that?
Great.
What does that look like? So, we got to talk about that. So today it's just outlining what Jesus said is, watch these signs. We've presented information about those signs and urge you to consider it. And we're gonna keep going with this because there's more information to be gleaned, and then to understand. And as we talk together, are we supposed to pay attention to something even more that we see, and therefore hear differently about how do we prepare for that? So those are the questions we have. So it'll be fun to continue talking about it, and at least getting through what Scripture says about it, which is to me really, really interesting. So any questions, you can send it to them.
Thanks for sharing all that wisdom, for sure. And yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut off.
No, go ahead. Anybody have questions, send it to us on the comments section, or questions@afjministry.com, and then we'll be happy to pick up, particularly about the end times. You might be wondering about things, or how about this, or how does that work? We're happy to talk about it. So we'll continue to do that, Kathy.
Great. Looking forward to it, and looking forward to another great week next week, and the things we have lined up. So
yep. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Enjoy your weekend.
All right. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.